Chapter 10. The Enemy Within. Methodists had enemies. Robert could see that. For every 100 who heard John or Charles Wesley preach, a dozen could be counted on to criticize them or their method. "Why does everyone praise them so much?" a man asked. "I have a relative who was with them in Oxford when the Holy Club started." "What's his name?" "Benjamin Ingham from Yorkshire. He went to America with them, and to the Moravians in Germany too. Indeed, I hear he became a Moravian." "It seems as if people break away from the Wesleys after a time," someone remarked. "It's not that," someone objected. "They break away from God." "There must be more than one way to worship God," a third remarked. "The Moravians say to be still, and the Methodists say to get busy doing good." The man's remark was enough to start Robert thinking again. Who could be called Christian? Mrs. Wesley helped. "If you give God the praise for any well-spent day, you are acting like a Christian. I often hear loud complaints of sin, but rarely, very rarely, any work of prayer and thanksgiving to our dear Lord." She added, "A Christian should live in the world like a stranger in an inn. Use what is necessary, enjoy what he can, but remember, it's not his home." Some people complained because of the Wesley family had dissenters on both sides. "I am sorry you turned dissenter from the Church of England," a man told John Wesley. "Well, if that is so, I didn't know it," Wesley replied. "Our 20th article defines a true church as a congregation of faithful people, wherein the true word of God is preached and the sacraments duly administered. The Church of England is the body of faithful people I belong to, and always shall." "But you do not go to the Church of England." "Indeed I do, and I do not preach except at times when there is no preaching in the church." He continued, "Who are the worst dissenters from this church? Sabbath breakers? Drunkards? Fighters? Liars? Lovers of money or dress? Praise or pleasure more than lovers of God? All these are dissenters who belong to the synagogue of Satan." The law of England acknowledged people who did not agree with the Church of England and called them dissenters. The people who disagreed with John Wesley had no such name. On a trip to Bristol with Father, Robert saw dozens of people in the 2 alleys by the New Room at the horse fair. These people had not come to listen to Wesley preach. They shouted, cursed, and pushed each other toward the door of the New Room. "Down with the enemy of the church," a man shouted. "Down with the preacher of false doctrine," called another. "Out! Out with John Wesley!" The mayor of Bristol, Stephen Clutterbuck, sent orders for the mob to break up. No one moved. The shouts actually increased. "Down with John Wesley! John Wesley must go!" The chief constable came in person and tried to quiet the people. The leader stormed, "This is none of your business. Leave him to us. We'll take care of this John Wesley and all of his Methodists." The chief constable, with several officers of the law, took the ringleaders to court. Mayor Clutterbuck cut their protests off. "What Mr. Wesley does is not for you to decide. I'll keep the peace, and I will allow no rioting in this city." Why did people, more people than ever, hate a man who was trying to show them God's plan for their salvation? "They're afraid," Father told Robert. Father was studying the Bible every spare minute so he could become a lay preacher like Thomas Maxfield and others. Afraid? Why should anyone be afraid? What were they afraid something would happen to them as it did to John Hayden, who was deathly sick until he confessed his sins and made peace with God? "Does everyone have to be sick before they're converted?" Robert asked Father. "No," Father answered. "It is true that Charles Wesley was sick just before his conversion, but John Wesley did not have such a struggle. He felt his heart strangely warmed." "Then a person doesn't have to be sick to be converted?" Robert did not mean his words to be a question. They were a statement. He remembered John Wesley telling of his early search for the faith which no one can have without knowing he had it. "Why is it that the Methodists have more and more enemies?" Robert asked Father. "Because they have more faith." "But God tests us by opposites," Father explained. "Faith isn't real faith until it is tried." "You mean you have to keep this faith no matter what happens?" "Yes." Father told how John Wesley tried to visit a soldier about to be executed for deserting, and who had been converted. The commanding officer would not let Mr. Wesley or any of his people in because he thought Methodists were atheists. The Methodists were called other names too, such as enthusiasts. It's just ugly enthusiasm, people would say, if converts shouted with joy of letting Christ live in them. Such joy made enemies. Why? Robert could only watch and wait for an answer. He knew one thing to be true: John Wesley's statement that it was an absolute impossibility to be a Christian. Nor could a Christian be, as Wesley put it, namby-pamby. Was it so bad to be enthusiastic? Robert remembered Wesley telling about a young man who had asked his opinion about Whitfield's journals. They are enthusiasm from beginning to end, the young man had said. He talks so much about joy and stuff and inward feelings, I declare, I cannot tell what to make of it. Wesley told the young man that the inward working of the Spirit of God might be misunderstood by those who had not felt them. The young man's comments did not upset Wesley too much. He was used to criticism. What really hurt him was discovering his misplaced trust in two young men, Wilman Snoddy and Robert Ramsey, whom he hired to teach at the Kingswood School, left after 3 or 4 months. They took more than 30 pounds of the money collected for building the school. Someone exclaimed. John Wesley is just too trusting, a man declared. But God is with him. Another said, Did you hear what happened to one of the leaders in the riot the other night? He hanged himself. Another one had severe pain for many days, and still another came to Mr. Wesley and said he had become drunk on purpose to stir up the riot, but when he came to the new room, he could not open his mouth. Nothing will prevent God's word from spreading over England, Father declared. It's like a seed dropped on good soil. Birds may come and eat some of the seed. Some may not receive enough water and die, but nobody on earth can destroy all the seeds. If storms don't destroy them, the grain grows stronger than before, Robert said. Hadn't he thought something like that before? He was beginning to sound like a preacher himself. But that's impossible, he thought. I don't even want to be a preacher. But he watched and he listened and he waited. Where would John Wesley's preaching lead to next? Back in London, Robert found out. He heard John Wesley declare in his usual abrupt way, 9 out of 10 of you are swallowed up in the dead sea of stillness. John Wesley told the Fetter Lane members that they had strayed from the faith. They rebelled for the most part and did not accept Wesley's statement. One man had his own idea about being saved. God knows before they are born which people will love him. They will be saved and others will never will be, he told Wesley. And many of your society believe this too. I never ask whether they think that way or not. Only they that do not trouble others by arguing about it. But I will dispute about it. Whenever you come? John Wesley asked. Yes. Why would you come among us who you think differently than you? Because you are all wrong, the man said, and I am resolved to set you all right. John Wesley advised him not to come. Well, then I will go and tell all the world that you and your brothers are false prophets. Later at the foundry, Robert heard John Wesley discuss the problem with his mother. There is no time to delay. If we do, will utterly destroy the cause of God. I must strike at the root of this grand delusion. At an early morning meeting at the foundry, Wesley fasted, put on his black robe, and with a prayer on his lips, he told the people it was not enough to believe. If you love me, keep my commandments, Wesley preached. To no one's surprise, the Fetter Lane Society broke up. Those who chose to follow John Wesley met after that at the foundry. More and more people joined the Methodists. They still belonged to the Church of England, but they liked being shown a method of fulfilling God's will. John Wesley showed them how. He and his members helped poor people, prisoners, the sick, and the orphans. If we see God in all things and do all for him, then all things are easy, Wesley said. Give to the poor and you shall have treasure in heaven, he often quoted. How could anyone be offended by John Wesley's preaching? Why were there enemies? Why did some people come to be entertained as if John Wesley were an actor? Come and hear the preaching man. He preaches without a book, Robert heard someone say. You mean the Methodists? Yeah, it's better than a sideshow on a market day. Yet John Wesley made few gestures when he preached. Yes, I often speak loud. I often speak vehemently, he admitted, but I never scream. I never strain myself. I dare not. I know it would be a sin against God. Wesley never talked long either. An ordinary sermon took 20 minutes. My brother Charles and I both like to speak plain and blunt, without going a great deal around, he said. He could be blunt about other men's preaching too. I am sick and tired of hearing some men preach Christ. Let some pert, self-sufficient animal, who has neither sense nor grace, bawl out something about Christ or his blood, and his hearers cry out, "Oh, what a fine gospel sermon!" No, John Wesley could not be said to be namby-pamby in his convictions, Robert decided. Maybe that was why he made enemies. Never turn your back on a friend or a foe, Wesley said. Sometimes he did not answer a taunt. Robert remembered with amusement. A dissenter had called out, "Quid est tibi nomen?" That means, "What is your name?" Robert whispered to his father. "It is Latin." He explained that John Wesley often talked with his brother in Latin. Wesley did not answer the man who heckled him. "See," the dissenter told his companions in triumph. "I told you he did not understand Latin." Other attacks were far-fetched. "I know for a fact that John Wesley keeps 2 Catholic priests in his house, and he gets a large sum of money from Spain, and as soon as the Spaniards land in England, he'll join them with 20,000 men," a man said. "Yep, he is a Jesuit, that's plain," another agreed. Wesley ignored such remarks. He had learned in America that people blamed him for words he never said, and actions he never did. He considered his work in America a failure, but he was not going to fail in England. Which was worse, the enemy within or the enemy without, Robert wondered. Some of John Wesley's friends did not agree with him anymore. George Whitefield, who had once begged Wesley to come to Bristol, had turned Calvinist. "The Methodists are splitting into 2 camps," Father said. "What if everyone found God and followed him without being with other people? Other people made all the trouble." John Wesley answered that. "Years ago I met a man who told me, 'You cannot serve him alone. You must therefore find companions or make them. The Bible knows nothing of religion by oneself.' People could work together or against each other. Some enemies were outside and some were inside. Thoughts themselves could become enemies. When John Wesley asked after a sermon, 'Does anyone feel different? Will you speak of it?' a number of people always responded. Then why can't I? Robert asked himself. Was it because of the enemy within?